This is the Dr. A Show with your host, Dr. Will Aguila.
Welcome to the show. Do you find that you're often forgetting certain things? Do you often feel sluggish or tired? Is your thinking blurry or hazy? Well, our first guest today, Dr. Neal Barnard, says that many of those symptoms are due to your eating habits. He will tell us what you can do to think more clearly with power foods for the brain. Neal Barnard, MD, is a clinical researcher, author, and health advocate. He founded the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine in 1985. PCRM, as it is called, has since grown into a nationwide group of physicians and lay supporters that promotes preventive medicine and addresses controversies in modern medicine. And as president of PCRM, Dr. Barnard has been instrumental in efforts to reform federal dietary guidelines. Dr. Barnard is an author of 15 books and medical expert, and he has appeared on numerous TV shows including Dr. Oz and CBS This Morning. He has been host to 3 PBS television specials. His newest book is titled Power Foods for the Brain, an effective 3-step plan to protect your mind and strengthen your memory. In it, he talks about how the foods we eat can affect our memory and our brain health. And this is why we invited him here today. Dr. Barnard, welcome to the Dr. A Show.
Thank you. It's great to be with you today.
Dr. Barnard, for most of us, it's hard to believe that what we put in our mouths can really affect our brain function. Tell me why that's so.
15 years ago, I don't think we could have said that. We had the idea that the loss of our memory, whether it's Alzheimer's disease or strokes, that kind of thing, that it's just part of getting older and there's nothing you can do. But we've had a chance to look into the human brain. We know what's going wrong. And amazingly enough, it turns out that one of the most decisive parts, or one of the ways to really dramatically change that, is related to the food that we eat. There are certain foods that increase the risk of Alzheimer's disease. There are other foods that seem to be protective. Most people yet don't know about that, but it's information that we have and can put to use.
But a lot of times a simple lapse of memory seems like, that's no big deal. We all get that. And I know I get some of that as well. But behind this, there may be something more sinister in certain cases, correct?
Well, yes. By age 85, nearly half of Americans have Alzheimer's disease, and the projections for the future are just off the scale. But back in 1993, a research study got started in Chicago called the Chicago Health and Aging Project. And they tracked thousands of people and what they ate. And 10 years later, they reported some really amazing findings. People who were eating the most, what I'm going to call bad fat. That's the saturated fat that's in meats and in dairy products. And also the trans fats in a lot of snack foods, like donuts. People who got the most bad fat had dramatically higher risk of Alzheimer's disease compared to people who tended to avoid these things. And if you flip the numbers around, what that basically means is if you don't eat those things, your risk of developing Alzheimer's can be cut by 2/3, maybe as much as 80%. So that's just avoiding the bad things. But then there are certain good things. Foods rich in vitamin E, for example, foods rich in certain B vitamins, have a protective effect. And so we can exploit that. So if we avoid the bad things, bring the healthy things onto our plate, our risk of developing these problems plummets dramatically. And that seems to be true even for people who are genetically at risk or have other risk factors.
Now, there are some other reasons why people get some memory lapses. Can you go over some of those?
Well, that's for sure. When you and I were in internship, we weren't sleeping very much, and after about 3 or 4 days like that, you can't remember anything, which is why you have to walk around with a clipboard with every possible thing that you might need to remember written down. If people are not sleeping well, if people are on certain medication, Lipitor, for example, a very effective cholesterol-lowering drug, but one of the side effects of Lipitor is memory loss. It's not very common, but it can happen, and when it happens, it can be very, very severe. There are also certain medical conditions, thyroid issues, depression, gluten intolerance. None of these is terribly common, but they occur, and they can be reasons why people have memory problems.
But how can you tell when a mild brain lapse will really turn into something more serious?
I think your average person really cannot tell. What I look for is if a person is having a change from normal. For example, let's say you're 40 years old, and every now and then you can't remember the name of a movie actor or where you put your keys. No big deal. But if it's happening to you every day, that is a big deal. That's not you. So that's a time to see your doctor and be evaluated for, could there be a medication side effect that you're having? Could you have a vitamin deficiency, like perhaps you're low in B12? These things are easy to spot, easy to remedy, but your average person would not think of them, and they should be evaluated. But the most important thing in my across-the-board recommendation is that people should be taking a good, solid look at what they're eating. Because for me, growing up in Fargo, North Dakota, which, as I did, my grandpa was a cattle rancher, so every day of my life it was roast beef and steak and that kind of thing. If it wasn't that, it was pork chops or fried chicken. We were eating the bad fats every single day. That drove up our risk. In addition to that, when you look into the brains of people with Alzheimer's, we find other things that cause toxicity. Iron, copper, certain metals show up in the plaques in the brain that are the hallmark of this disease. How many people know where they might be getting excess iron or excess copper in the foods that they're eating? That's important to know as well, and it's important for people to be able to be on guard for those things.
But, a lot of people, including myself, sometimes we have, many things in our mind. Our mind is cluttered with lots of things and ideas and things that we have to do, and we may forget certain things. That doesn't necessarily mean you have a problem, right?
Definitely. What that means is that you have a full life. But the problem is if you're becoming non-functional because things that you know are no longer retrievable. As I mentioned, for a young, healthy person, it can be lack of sleep, very common. Stress, those things can happen. But medications, medical conditions can contribute as well.
Now, let's talk about Alzheimer's disease because it's become quite prevalent in the last few years. What are some of the warning signs to look for in somebody who may be developing that early on? Okay.
First of all, difficulty with memory. That's the most common thing, particularly words, simple things that you ought to know. And then also, there can be difficulties with reasoning things out, problem solving. Then third, there's something called visual spatial ability. If I said to you, can you draw a human face? You would get the eyes in the right place and the mouth and the nose and the ears in the right place. But when a person is having a cognitive problem in dementia, particularly Alzheimer's disease, that's one of the things that will go. Then fourth would be language, where language ability starts to deteriorate. And finally, personality. When your personality it's not you anymore. Anger bubbles over uncharacteristically, or impulsiveness can come through. Sometimes sexuality is expressed. Then doctors look at those things and say, I think this is the beginning of Alzheimer's disease. It can't be confirmed until after death when you examine the brain, but you can be fairly certain that in the absence of some other explanation, that's the most likely conclusion. Alzheimer's disease is very common. As I said, it's nearly half of people by age 85, and it's the most common reason for dementia in older people.
Yeah, but a lot of people may say, people at age 85, I don't have anything to worry about. So long from here. I mean, I'm so young. Do they need to worry?
I think they do need to worry for a couple of reasons. First of all, how old are you when you get your first gray hair? You're not 65. You're 35. Right. How old are you when you get your first wrinkle? That doesn't happen when you're 70. It happens when you're 27.
That's right.
And so the brain is aging also. And there was a very startling study done by Kaiser Permanente in California. They showed that the higher your cholesterol level, the higher your risk of Alzheimer's. But the cholesterol levels that they measured, I mean, first of all, that's an important finding in and of itself. If you're eating these bad fats, it's driving your cholesterol up, you're at high risk, not just for heart attack, but for Alzheimer's. But what was most striking about this study was the cholesterol levels that they measured and that predicted Alzheimer's risk. They were measured when the participants were 40 years old.
Wow.
Think about what that means. That means the person at the game eating the bacon cheeseburger and the chicken wings and so what do I care? I've got time. You have
so what you do now?
You are sealing your fate right now. In the same way as your cholesterol level is going to dictate your risk of cardiovascular problems. It's dictating the risk of Alzheimer's. So the people who do the best are the people who have switched to vegetarian, vegan-type diets. I've done the same after a background of really not eating those things. But it's definitely the best way to go.
Well, we're certainly going to talk about after the break. What foods protect your brain and what foods harm it? Find out when the Dr. A Show continues after these messages.